All right, and we're back. And so, um, yeah, we talked last time. Just as a quick recap, we talked a little bit about the theory of choice theory, and we are gonna talk a little bit more about that. But then we're gonna get into trait theory in this video. So, one thing that was brought up in the chapter right before we get into trait theory is situational crime prevention. And if you remember last time, I kind of talked about, how do we decrease delinquent activity and things like that. And so one of the things that our textbook puts forward is that crime control efforts must recognize the characteristics of sites and situations that are at risk to crime. The things that draw or push kids towards these sites and situations, what equips potential delinquents to take advantage of illegal opportunities offered by these sites and situations, and what constitutes the immediate triggers for delinquent actions. We have to understand that situational crime prevention is we have to understand everything that goes into that particular crime. We can't just say, oh, crime prevention, we need to increase parental guidance. That's great, but, well, what's the situation? Is it because the parents aren't present, or is it because the parents are present, but they're unavailable at this time where they're not there? Like, situational crime prevention says we have to look at all the factors. Potential targets, the means to commit a crime, potential offenders, accomplices, everything. Situational crime prevention is sorry, as an English teacher, I struggle sometimes with my words, so forgive me. I am also an English teacher. And so this is how I urge you to think about situational crime prevention is what factors make this possible. When you can identify those, then you can start approaching and doing this. You can actually prevent the crime in that situation. You understand. And this is where, terms like hotspots and a good old crackdown come from, is referring to situational crime prevention. Hotspots are a particular location or address that's a site of repeated and frequent criminal activity, and a crackdown is where law enforcement operation is designed to reduce or eliminate particular criminal activity. Like, they come from situational crime prevention. So, I'm going to end this section on choice theory with pretty much from the chapter 3, page 71, are choice theories valid? And this is where I did warn you in the last video, we were going to talk about school shooters. Just briefly, this is where. So, are choice theories valid? Well, some people may say yes, some people may say no. There are too many factors. But we can't ignore that some people do make the choice. So, is it possible that violent adolescents such as Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, who killed 13 and wounded 21 classmates at Columbine High School in 1999, were rational decision makers? Or was their behavior the product of twisted minds? To assume they made a rational choice to kill their classmates seems ill-advised. If delinquent acts are not truly rational and planned, then how can we explain why they occur? Why are some adolescents motivated to commit crimes, whereas others in similar circumstances remain law-abiding? Why do some kids choose crime over legal activities? That's important. This is why I said way back at the first point that this is a complicated system. This is not an easy answer. Everything that we talk about in this class, in these texts, they're theory, and we can look at applied application, but at the end of the day, these are things that there's not an easy answer. You have to just guess and check. You have to participate in it. And so it's difficult to talk about this. So, oops, I did not mean to create that little line. Sorry about that. All right. Transition. So now we're going to talk about trait theory. I don't know why I blanked on how to spell theories. Sorry about that. So, as I said, and I said it earlier, trait theories and choice theories. Choice theories are you making those active decisions. Trait theories imply that you don't have control. These are social factors, they're biological factors, they're all these things. And we do talk about an individual. I'm just ignoring that scribble that I accidentally made. We have another Caesar, but this one is Lombroso. And so the dates, our textbook gives us our 1835, sorry, not 13, to 1909. But I wanted to emphasize in particular, like Lombroso, we have lots of different people on this topic, and I'm just going to write their names. We have Raphael, Garofalo, we have Enrico Ferri, and we also have Charles Goring. And so the reason I put all these guys together is their ideas their concept was, yeah, biology makes delinquents. And so this was, if you've never heard of this, now known as pseudoscience before, phrenology, this is a big factor. In particular, and the reason why I bring this up is phrenology was founded in the 1700s. And so this plays directly into biology makes delinquents. The concepts of phrenology was the way your skull was shaped, the way your head was formed, could determine things about you, like your aspirations, your intelligence level, what you can and can't do. So if you're potentially dangerous, all these kinds of things. So 1700s had phrenology. Phrenology wasn't outed as a pseudoscience until the 1900s. So Lombroso, Garofalo, Ferri, Goring, they all had this, and this was accepted as fact. So this was how they viewed it. So, of course, as our Lombroso says, there are certain physical anomalies that are throwbacks to earlier stages in human evolution. Born criminals have enormous jaws, strong canines, a flattened nose, and double rows of teeth. Like, obviously, that's not true, but that was what they believed. So it's important to note that, trait theories had their root in biology, and we've since learned this is not accurate, with a little asterisk, and we will come back to that asterisk in a bit. And so, really, the contemporary trait theory looks at not biological factors, but social factors. And so that brings us to this. Specifically with social, we also have biosocial. And biosocial is just this association between biological makeup, environmental conditions, and antisocial behaviors. It's the idea that the trait theory, it's not just one piece, it is several pieces. It is your biochemical makeup, your the way your brain operates and works, your neurological functions, how those neurons fire in your brain, as well as genetic history. So like history of these things, but it also looks at environmental conditions, how you're raised, what does the world around you look like? Is your living conditions good or bad? And antisocial behaviors. As a potential delinquent, are you engaging in antisocial behaviors? Are you isolating yourself? Are you finding yourself called to certain groups? Like these are all these factors that play into this social concept, this biosocial trait of, or biosocial theory of, yeah. Anyway, so as I kind of said, I went through some of the biological. In particular, we have the biochemical, and it's just a fancy way of saying the the biochemical looks at the inner workings of your body. This is where we find out that alcohol consumption, carbon monoxide, lead, all these things that you were exposed to as a child or as a fetus in the womb through your mother actually, led to potential like lower IQ, delinquent behavior, and just general health issues. So that's an important thing to note, that the biochemical aspect looks at how your body works and how external factors like alcohol, carbon monoxide, lead, these things can lower your intelligence, increase the potential for delinquent behavior, cause health issues, that kind of stuff. There's actually, in relation to this, there is an argument to be made that diet can actually have an impact on your potential to be a delinquent if you have an unhealthy diet that does not have a lot of positive, encouraging outputs for your body, that it leads to an increased potential for delinquency. Partly because diet tends to be connected to things like ADHD, whether you feel, however you feel on that particular subject. But diet can definitely have an effect on depression as well. So there is something to be said about this. The other thing with the biological factor, and has to be mentioned specifically regarding adolescence, is hormone levels. So when an individual is a teenager and going through puberty, the reality is that the hormones are at their highest levels typically in the person's life. And when this is happening, this tends to affect the way our bodies work. It has to do with the, oh gosh, what is it? That pituitary gland, I believe. Not remembering what the specific, but there's a part of the brain that gets activated in particular with hormone levels. And during puberty, this is stimulated in a very different way than it is the rest of your life. But it does lead to increased violence, aggressive behaviors, things like that. So there is something to be said about hormonal levels being a biological factor of delinquent behaviors. It's not to say that just because your hormones are increased means you're going to commit a delinquent behavior, but it means that you're more likely to, because that clouds your judgment. Anyway, another thing with the biological factor is, and I'm not a fan of the term, but it's what our text uses, and I'm going to use it. And that's neurological dysfunction. Now, of course, when they talk about this, they're talking about a minimal brain dysfunction where, there has been some kind of deficit. So it could be an accident or something of that nature. So that is a fair assumption to be made. So it could be trauma to the brain. But it also very well includes things like ADHD, depression, specifically clinical depression. Not mentioned in our book, but important to note, autism spectrum disorder. These are things that they consider as part of neurological dysfunction, which is why I said I'm not a fan of this term. They also put just in general. For everything good our textbook does, there's stuff like this that bothers me, and I will admit that I am a little biased in why it bothers me. I am a neurodivergent individual. My middle nephew is on the autism spectrum. So is my soon to be other nephew through marriage is also on the autism spectrum. Several members of my family have diagnosed learning disabilities. I have clinical depression as well as some serious trauma, not physical trauma, but mental trauma. And my partner has ADHD. Like, these are all things, and the idea that this neurological dysfunction plays a potential factor in the biosocial theory of delinquency means that every single one of us could have been a delinquent. And truly, there is an issue with that, and I will talk about it briefly. But I just want to say, like, I have a personal bias regarding this particular piece only because it is something that I see. But yeah. Anyway, there is a suspected link between brain dysfunction and antisocial behaviors. I would argue part of the biggest issue is that, the disconnect between these factors. But our textbook does make a point after this section to mention, and I have it big highlighted in the book. It's, despite this evidence, the learning disability juvenile delinquency link has always been controversial. It's possible that the LD child may not be more susceptible to delinquent behavior than a non-LD child, that the link may be an artifact of bias in the way LD children are treated at school or by police. And that's the piece. Much like, and we've talked briefly about it in Intro to Criminal Justice, issues like systemic racism and things like that definitely are something that needs to be talked about. But we also don't often talk about people on the autism spectrum. We don't talk about clinically depressed individuals. We don't talk about people with learning disabilities and how they engage in the criminal justice system, or rather how issues that have been stigmas, societal stigmas, have placed individuals to be predisposed for this. There is a legitimate issue, and when we talk about some of the actual social factors, not just the biological, you'll understand what I mean, because I will talk about the issue of bias coming up in this. Anyway, as a side note, and just kind of, I have nowhere else to put it, and it comes right after this stuff in the chapter. There is a concept, and I understand where it comes from. But arousal theory is the idea that the reason you commit a crime is because it feels good. You like doing it. It tends to be the feeling of getting away with it. So if we come back to the idea that the delinquent mind is still developing, the internal workings of your body is not quite finished, the hormonal levels are higher. If something feels good, you're gonna do it. It tends to be what happens. So it does make sense that this happens. But what I will say, the TDLR of what is the next section, which is genetic influences. Biosocial theorists believe antisocial behavior characteristics and mental disorders can be passed down in the same way that color of hair and eyes and things like that. There is a lot of research data on it. It comes down to a larger argument of nature versus nurture, and we will also talk about that issue. Ooh. We will talk about that argument in a little bit, but the TDLR is that despite the fact that there seems to be some kind of data that supports it, we can't say for certain that delinquency is biological. We can't say that it is passed down through biology. We can say that there tends to be similar markers. We definitely, as we learn more about things like depression and autism spectrum disorder and other learning disabilities, we learn that some of these can be passed down biologically. So there is potential that there is a biological component, but I would argue the biological component is not of delinquency, but of factors that play into delinquency. At least that's how I would say it. So, yeah, take it or leave it. You don't have to agree with me. You can say that, Mr. Wheaton, you're full of crap, and that's totally fine. But I figured I'd mention that the biology thing is not necessarily quite there. And so, we talk about the biology. The next thing we're going to talk about is, where's my pen? There we are. The psychological. And actually, that's where we're going to end for this video. We will pick up talking about the psychological aspect of this biosocial theory of the impact on delinquency and delinquency itself. But yeah, we'll pick it up next time. Thanks for sticking through. Sorry about my coughing and voice.